Just want to take a quick moment and talk about the shooting that happened at the high school in Oxford, Michigan. It's terrible, tragic, and horrific. But as usual, when these terrible events happen, there are things that we can learn so that we can move forward into the future a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit more aware of what we can do in such situations. So if you want to know more about that, stay tuned. So before we get into that, I want to welcome you to the channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. All the friends and frenemies, glad to have you back once again. If this is your first time, thanks for stopping by. This is where we apply logic and conviction to news, politics, all different types of stuff. I'm C. Scott, and this is my view. So I want to talk about the shooting that happened at the high school. Again, it's such a terrible thing. My heart goes out to every parent, every child, every person that was in the community, because it's the kind of thing that shakes people up and shakes things up and really has wide-reaching effects and things that can happen after it. So our condolences and greatest consideration goes out to them, continuously praying for their families and everybody involved in that, even the police officers, the people that dealt with medical situations or are dealing with medical situations, all those kind of things. A lot of people have trauma that's built into taking care of those situations. So again, our heart goes out to them. We'll continue to pray for them. I hope you'll continue to pray for them. Also, I want to look at this event and break it down, I think, into like 4 sections. I want to talk about the incident that happened briefly. I also want to talk about the after effects, the post information that came out after the event and things that happened after the event. I also want to then look at what can we learn and how can we get better at responding or dealing with such situations. And last thing I want to look at is the case going forward against the shooter, who happened to be a 15-year-old child, which is sad and insane. And now also there's going to be a case against the parents, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. I'm sure you already know, for the most part, the incident that happened, but around Monday or Tuesday, there was a student, young man, 15-year-old boy, came out of the bathroom of his high school with a handgun, and he started pointing and shooting and causing havoc and wreaking terrorism on people's lives. And so as a result of his actions, 4 people have lost their lives. They were all students that lost their lives. And then 6 or 7 people were wounded from gunfire after that. And they were all students except for one was a teacher. And I believe most of them, I think all of them, should be out of the woods at this point, where they just have to recover. I don't believe there's any more critical who are possibly may not make it from their injuries. So it was a very short event. The sheriff for that county that handled the response and things like that, and he said there was only about 5 minutes from the time they got the first call until the time that they had the killer in custody, which is a pretty short time. But unfortunately, when police are minutes away, the seconds really count. And that's no diss against the police, that's just how life is. So within that short period of time, lives were taken, people were wounded, in addition to all the trauma and stress and things that happened from that event. So apparently, based on the reports and the press conferences that were given by the police, school did everything right concerning their response. So when the shots rang out, the students in the buildings, they immediately were in contact with the classrooms through their radios and things like that. They got the doors shut, barricaded, all the things that they were actually supposed to do according to their training, they did, which is a really good thing for the school. And they also said that the school was one that only had one entrance. You had to check in. And so they really took a lot of precautions. They really did things as well as could be done in a situation, or to deal with or limit a situation like that. But this young man was able to bring a handgun into the school in his backpack. So in the area that I live in, I believe after the Parkland shooting, or it may have been a different shooting, but after that, in the area I live in, the ISDs decided that all the kids, all the students, have to have clear backpacks so that it'd be a little bit harder to hide stuff in their backpacks. But even with a clear backpack, you could still hide some stuff in there, and unless you have somebody actively looking in each backpack and things like that, it's helpful, but it's, I don't think that necessarily changes the game. They also said the young man with the firearm had 3 magazines. I'm guessing they were fully loaded, and I believe based on the model, each magazine would hold like 15 or 16 rounds. And when they arrested him, he had, I think, 7 loose rounds in his pocket, and the gun he had in his hand wasn't empty. The incident actually stopped when the school resource officer, which is a cop that works in the school, as soon as they approached him, the incident was over. He didn't resist. He didn't shoot it out with the police. They didn't shoot at him. As soon as they were on scene, pointed a gun at him, it was over. It took a couple minutes, though, for the school resource officer to get there because he wasn't in the building at the moment. He was close by. Again, I think he was only a few minutes away. But in their system, they don't have one officer at every school. They have one officer for a few schools. And I don't know what the distance is between all those schools. But he had to respond and get there. He went toward the sound of gunfire. And again, as soon as the shooter saw the police, the shooting was over. There was a lot of stuff that happened that normally happens after shooting. There's a whole bunch of reports. There's a whole bunch of information that gets released that's not true and things like that. But moving on from the incident to the post-incident, I think the press conferences and the information that they were putting out, I think they were really good. I think the sheriff did a really good job. There were several other people with the sheriff that were there. I think they had the representative for that area of Michigan was there. They had an FBI representative and several people. I think they all did a really good job to show that they were working together, that they were dealing with the situation and finding out as much information as they can. And they gave a good bit of information talking about what happened with the young person. They didn't release his name right away because he was a minor. And I think they said they don't release the names of minors until they're actually charged. So obviously they had to get more information. They also said in the press conferences that they didn't have any issues with this kid. This kid wasn't on the radar of the school or the police up until this event. And then they put a caveat and they said they were made aware later that there was a meeting with that child and the school officials the day before and the day of the shooting. So there were 2 incidents, and they didn't go into that very much, talking about what was dealt with in those meetings. They just said they happened, but before that there were no issues, anything like that. Somebody asked if the kid was bullied, and the sheriff said there were no reports. They talked to the person who's over the bullying type of stuff, and that didn't come up. And then he also went on to say several times that even if he was bullied, that wouldn't be an excuse for him to do what he did. So I think they really put out a lot of good information. I think they were trying to do as well as they could to control the situation, and they had a pretty unified front. I'd also give thumbs up, kudos, or good job again to the sheriff and those around. They didn't make stuff political right away, or they haven't really made it political yet. They didn't grandstand and talk about how great they were, or draw attention to themselves, or immediately try and point blame at anybody other than the shooter. They were compassionate. Again, they gave a bunch of information. I think that went well. One of the negative things that happens is the reporters and their questions. I mean, it seems like they might be either some of the dumbest people in the world, or they just don't care about order, and they don't care about investigations and things like that. They would constantly ask the same questions that the police can't talk about if they're doing an investigation and things like that. They would some of them would ask questions about gun laws and try and take it to a political direction, and the sheriff, the prosecutor that was in some of those, and no one else took bait to go and try and make this a political situation, which I thought was really good, because we've seen that happen before, where the bodies of deceased are still warm, and you have people talking about politics and laws and party information going back and forth. So I think that was really good. All right, so let's talk about what we can learn or what we could do better. There isn't really a whole lot that could have been done, I think, to limit or mitigate this situation from being any worse. In a free society, we have to face the fact that if we're going to be free, we do have to take the risk of certain dangers being present, and then we can do what we can to mitigate those from that point. But if we're going to be free, we have to take certain risks. And, those risks are that sometimes people can do damage. But thankfully, in this case, the damage was limited because of the proper response of the law enforcement and the school and everybody there. So I don't think there's really a whole lot. What could have changed the situation? Well, like some reporters asked several times about metal detectors in the school. One, there aren't many schools with metal detectors. So where I was growing up, they had metal detectors in schools like back in the, way back in the 90s, but that was because it was a violent area and they were already dealing with people bringing guns to school and shootings and gang stuff and all that, at a high level. And so it made sense at that school. And there are some schools that have metal detectors and they make sense at those schools. But, metal detector may have changed the situation. Obviously if he tried to bring it in and couldn't bring it in, or, it would have just kept the situation from happening if he knew he had to go through a metal detector. But, in the Parkland case, like the sheriff brought up, the shooter went in through a back door. And so that doesn't mean that just because there's a metal detector in the front door that somebody can't get into a back door with a firearm. Plus, it's just not financially feasible for every school in the nation to have metal detectors. It adds a whole lot to the school and what they have to do in the morning and their check-in and check-out processes and things like that. And so, I don't think a metal detector or anything like that is really all that much of a good idea or a fault that the school didn't have. Now, this happened in a county in Michigan called Oakland County, which is a pretty good, well-to-do county. They have plenty of resources. They have a good tax base and things like that. And so they have well-trained law enforcement. Their schools are well-trained. They have a lot of things that were going for them. And that was one of the things the prosecutor and the sheriff stressed in their press conferences was the fact that not every school and school district can do what they did in Oakland County, which I think is something that needs to be looked at or explored maybe for smaller school districts because they don't have the financing. And again, that's a part of life, but they were able to do things that other areas weren't going to be able to do. And so that was one of the reasons their response was really good compared to the terribleness or tragicness of the situation. So one major thing that I think would have changed the game is if the school resource officer was on site. That would have taken some time away from the killer being able to shoot at people. Or if they had armed teachers. There are teachers in different districts in different states that are allowed to secretly carry weapons. They have to go through a whole bunch of training and things like that. But I absolutely 100% support that program for this very reason. When seconds count, police are minutes away. And so if there was a teacher that was there, that would have reduced the time, the 5-minute time where he was able to hit 11 or 12 people with bullets, that would have been reduced. He shot into a few classrooms. They have some doors and barricades and things like that got shot into, which was good that the barricades were there. But the fact that this kid stopped shooting at people when other people pointed guns at him, the situation was over. The goal to me would be, how soon can we get somebody on scene with a firearm that can deal with that situation? And so, again, the programs that train teachers to carry guns responsibly and all that kind of stuff, that's one thing that would have made this situation a whole lot better. It doesn't mean that no one would have lost their lives. It doesn't mean that anyone wouldn't have been shot, but it does mean that they would have been on scene a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes faster. May have cut the time in half that the kid had to shoot. So that's the main thing I think can make a difference in that situation. There should be multiple armed individuals, teachers who want to go through the process and things like that. If they're on scene, they would bring these situations down drastically, even though technically they don't happen statistically all that much considering the number of schools we have and the number of students we have in the United States. But everything else they did went to plan. The run, hide, fight went into effect. There was even a young man named Tate who lost his life because he charged and went at the shooter, and he was credited with changing, the mind of the shooter, where the shooter's attention, the killer's attention was on this young man, and other people were allowed to escape or move or redirect and things like that. And it's so sad that he lost his life, but he went out bravely, he went out strong, he went out giving his life to protect other people. And I can't say enough about that, can't say enough about him. Apparently he was a football player, had a really good GPA, seemed like a stud of a kid. And it's just so unfortunate that he was lost in a situation like that, but he couldn't hide, he couldn't run, and so he decided to fight, and they believe that that changed some things for other students. Last thing to get into, and I'm trying not to make this super long, but it usually is. Anyway, last thing to get into is now the case going forward. So they have the kid on video all over the place. They have cameras, they said, all throughout the school, and so, the kid is toast. He's going to be convicted. There are no doubts or anything about that because they have him on video all over the place, plus other evidence. So, they say he's allegedly the killer, but, we know in real life he was the killer. Today, as the recording of this video, the prosecutor in that county actually announced that she was going to be pressing charges against both parents of this 15-year-old killer. This is very rare. I don't know of another case that this has happened in, but there's actually a kind of good reason why these parents would be held accountable. So it's extremely rare, but in this case, I can kind of understand and support the prosecutor bringing charges against the parents. Obviously, it is the child who made the decision to go and shoot, but the parents in this situation can be blamed. Let's talk about why. So there were two meetings that were discussed in the press conferences that the school had, but nobody said what was talked about on those two meetings. So today we find out that during those two meetings there were two very important things that happened. The first meeting, we find out that one teacher got spooked because the kid was looking up ammunition on his phone. To me, that's not a big deal. It may be, they said it was inappropriate for him to be doing at school, but it's ammunition. It's something that's a legal product. They wouldn't be concerned if he was looking up all types of other stuff that is inappropriate for kids and stuff, but I don't want to go there. He was looking up ammunition, and so, he got called to the office essentially or whatever, and they sent an email to the parents that the parents didn't respond to right away. But, in the investigation, they got the text messages from the parents' phones, and after that, the mom said, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You need to learn to not get caught." Something like that, very close to that, which is kind of an indication of, she's not, really being responsible for her child. But again, I don't think it's that big of a deal for a young person to be looking up ammunition if they're allowed to shoot. The second thing is the bigger deal, and that is the day of the shooting, the parents were called to the school. They made them come to the school because of a note a teacher saw on the kid's desk. This note is the really big deal because it showed some issues, some intent, some problems. So they found this note. Apparently the teacher took a picture of it. It said things like, "Help me, my life is useless, the thoughts won't stop." He drew a picture of somebody getting shot, blood everywhere, I think it said, and it says, "The world is dead." And so all that was on this note, and that's kind of a lot. And so he gets called again to the office. A counselor comes and takes him out of class, gets him in his backpack, which they believe is where the gun was stored at the time. And they call the parents in. They have to come to this meeting. They talk about this stuff to the parents. They show the note. I believe the prosecutor said that the note had been altered from the time the teacher saw it and maybe took a picture of it to the time the parents were able to see it, but I'm guessing that if the teacher was able to take a picture of it, then the parents would have been able to see the actual note. And so they told the school told the parents they had to get him counseling within 48 hours. And then it says that the parents resisted the child having to leave school. They didn't want them to have to leave school. They thought it should be able to go back. That, I believe, is going to be the main issue in the charge against the parents. So the parents were actually charged today, when I'm recording the video, they were charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, which is 1 count for each person who was deceased. That's a really, really, really big deal, but I believe they have a case. Prosecutor, I think, did fine up until the end of this press conference. You know, the times before, she talked about gun owners, she talks about gun ownership being a right, and I kind of, I wasn't sure where she was at. She doesn't present herself like a gun owner, but she says she knows gun owners, and early on, maybe day 1 or day 2, she talked about how gun ownership comes with responsibility, and you should, gun owners have to lock up their weapons, and they have to store the ammunition locked up separately, which is ludicrous. You don't have defensive weapons and things like that, and they have to be locked up all the time. Sometimes they can or should be, but I don't believe that should be the law. And so they also talked about, there were some social media posts that the killer kid put out, that he had gotten the gun 4 days ago. It was an early Christmas present, supposedly, and so the prosecutor's making a big deal about the parents getting the gun for this kid. And so that's kind of a gray area. Like when you're under 21 in most states, you can't, I think it might be a federal law, under 21 you can't own a pistol. But it's kind of a gray area, I say, because when parents buy something for kids, you buy your kid a car, but you don't put the car in their name, and you don't put the insurance in their name. They're allowed to drive it, they're on the insurance, sort of it's their car, but sort of it's not. Can you get a kid a cell phone? Sort of it's their phone, but you let them disobey or mess up at school, whatever, what happens, you take the phone and it's not their phone anymore. So I think that's a gray area of ownership of the gun. Plus, they also said the gun was kept at home in the parents' room. Now, it was kept in a drawer that was unlocked, and so obviously the kid was able to get to it. And so I don't think the purchase of the gun, allowing the kid to shoot the gun, there was also social media posts by the mom, apparently like at a range or something, saying they were having some mom and son time where he was, testing out or using his early Christmas present, something like that. She was making a big deal out of that. I don't think that's a big deal. I can find you other cases where 15-year-olds had access to weapons and were able to protect themselves, protect their siblings, protect their homes, because they knew how to use firearms and because they were able to access it. So it shouldn't be universally thought that kids shouldn't be allowed to shoot, and she indicated that she believed that. So on the parent case side, I think they are going to have some issues. In my mind, all their issues go to that school meeting. When they were in the meeting and they saw the information presented about the stuff that the kid was writing out, they never said anything about him having a gun. They didn't ask him about having the gun, if he had it with him or what was going on. They didn't check his backpack, apparently, things like that. And then they resisted him going home, which means they said that they wanted him to stay, and I don't know how much pressure they may have applied, but that's going to be an issue. It's also going to be an issue for the school because the school didn't do anything. So the school hadn't communicated to the police. But if there was an incident where he was looking at ammunition on Tuesday and they report that to the police later on Tuesday, are they going to do anything with that information? I don't think I would, especially if he didn't have any issues before. He didn't say, oh, I'm looking for ammunition to do X, Y, and Z. So to me, I don't know, that just doesn't seem like an issue. Also, they could have reported the meeting that they had with that writing and information and stuff. But again, that's not something that I think offhand that you would report to the police or your school resource officer. He presented that he was having himself issues, but he didn't say anything about shooting a school up or wanting to harm other people. So, again, I think that's a gray area. In hindsight, we can say, well, of course, they should have said this and done that, but hindsight's 20/20. In the moment, and when they're dealing with a lot of kids that are dealing with issues it's kind of hard to say that this one trigger should have caused that thing over there. So I don't know. The school though might have some issues if their policy when that type of thing happens is that the kid has to go home and they let the child stay, then they're really going to have issues. But if they have room in their policy that says that they, tell the parents they have to get the child counseling within 48 hours or they can't come back, and they don't do anything until the 48 hours is up, then that's a whole nother situation. The last thing to talk about during dealing with this case is the prosecutor. The prosecutor, she did really good for a while, but she kind of shows, I wouldn't put her on a gun grabber list, but she's obviously not a defender of the Second Amendment. So somebody asked her a question in the end of this press conference, and she said that Michigan's laws were woefully inadequate because Michigan doesn't have a safe storage law, which is by law, you have to store your weapons this way no matter what. Whether you have kids in the house, whether you don't have kids in the house, whether they're 15, whether they're 12, whether they're 2, it says, you have to do these certain things, which again, I think is a terrible idea. Obviously, if you have people in your home that that you have reasonable suspicion that might do something crazy with a firearm, yes, you should do something with that firearm, and you should be responsible if that person takes that weapon and does something with it. But in the same system, we give grace and latitude to people who aren't mentally competent to stand trial, and we say, oh well, because of their mindset or something going on, maybe they don't know what they did. Well, how do we let these people off because they didn't know what they did, but the parents of someone who knowingly could have done something, we want to put the hammer down on them. So I don't know if I said that clear enough, but if parents in that situation who didn't have any idea or knowledge that their young person might commit a crime and they accessed a weapon, I don't think in most situations they should be charged the same way that a person who's dealing with someone who's mentally incompetent shouldn't be held responsible if that mentally incompetent person does something that's terrible or somehow breaks the law. So I think that's a gray area, but the prosecutor, she's obviously not a Second Amendment. She wants to have the Second Amendment with restrictions, and so it'll be interesting to see if she or this case gets used to try to suppress or put a damper on the Second Amendment rights. The governor in Michigan is a leftist, a terrible leftist that hasn't been leading very great in the state, especially dealing with all the COVID stuff, and so we'll see if they try and use this to push some seriously anti-Second Amendment stuff. But we haven't seen it yet. The sheriff of the county was very supportive. I don't know about the area, if it's a blue area or red area that's in Michigan, which is a blue state. So we'll see. That's kind of the political stuff that they didn't let out of the bag really until the end. But we'll see what happens with that. So that's my breakdown of the whole event. There's not a whole lot that I think could be done much better, but I think the one thing that could be done better could cut that event in half and obviously save lives and things like that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Sorry it's been so long. I shouldn't have left you without. But anyway, trying to be back now. I have some other videos that will be coming out next week about something that's totally different, but trying to get back on track, back in the saddle. I'm glad to see you here. Don't forget, like this video if you agree with me. If you don't agree with me, let me know in the comments. That's fine too. And let me know where you disagree or where you think I got it wrong. All right, friends, sorry for the long video, but it's kind of a big, long situation. I think that's all I have for you, friends. I'm C. Scott, and that's how I see it.